I'm a bit of light relief, I think. Fairly simple ideas, but ideas that no one seems to have looked at before. And where I come from is the very simple observation that in a generation we've gone from film cameras, which I still have too many of, to everyone being able to shoot their own high-definition movies on their phones. And we've done that in 25, 30 years. And in text, we've gone from books to electronic books, which are just as bloody infuriating most of the time. Things like Microsoft Word, where we're creating the words, where we have this stultified approach. It's in dark mode, so we'll make the top of it dark. What about the rest of the document? I think actually Word has now just changed that in Word 365. And I've got three very simple ideas of how you can move text away from the limitations that have been imposed on it by print. The first one actually is not bringing together academic texts, it's actually breaking them apart, and that's having multiple views of the same text document, which is something that is exceptional in any app that deals with text. The second one is interlinear text, which I'm sure we're all familiar with and can't remember the last time we actually used an interlinear text because they're so rare. And the final one is my little beef about custom appearances. So let's talk about multiple views first. We're hidebound by this idea. Look, there's a bookmark in my book. We can have multiple bookmarks, so we can flip between different places, but we've got one book. We can't break it apart. We can't. I mean, I know that some scholars actually had multiple copies of books, so they could have them open at different sections on lectins. It's ever so easy to do electronically. This is a free app of mine, a PDF reader, and these are four views on the same PDF, which I think some of you are probably quite familiar with. When you're studying an academic text, you can have a double-page spread open that you're actually looking at and reading. You can have references or endnotes open. You can have an appendix open. And yet, this is an exceptional feature. I can't think why. So many people use my PDF reader just because of this single feature. You can open as many windows on a document as you like. Interlinear text seems a little bit more esoteric. It's something for the linguists, but in actual fact, a lot of us need to read documents in more than one version. I've been writing recently about some of the great classics of the Renaissance. Just finished a big series on my blog about Dante's Divine Comedy. And we have Project Gutenberg, which has, I forget how many tens of thousands of free texts available in it. I don't read Italian very well, but it's very useful to be able to look at the original Italian text and maybe a couple of translations. How can you do that on a computer? Well, you could use systems like Exmeralda. Has anyone come across Exmeralda? It's a dedicated linguist system, and you can mark up all your texts in XML, and then they go beautifully interlinear. Absolutely useless for most people. We want something that parses ordinary punctuation. It's poetry. At the end of every line, we have a line ending. Between stanzas, we have a blank line. Parse it very simply, and you can move away from the old metal type. When I was a teenager, I actually learned to do printing in a proper metal print shop, and setting up this sort of thing was a nightmare, particularly with interlinear text, because you had to have your text expert with you so that you actually lined everything up correctly. That's an electronic copy of an old interlinear text. And this again is a free rich text reader, RTF reader, and you can put into it text that are, all you have to do is spend maybe only 10, 20 minutes tidying up the formatting so that the text you're putting in are regular, and you then interlace them all and you end up with interlinear text, which you can then use to your heart's content. Very simple, no XML is used, and it's the sort of thing that anyone can do. I do with text from Project Gutenberg. So you can have the Dante's original, I think I've got a Longfellow translation and I've got a more modern translation. And that's a slightly longer section of text. Very, very simple to do, and doesn't require markup, which I think is crucial. The final thing that I want to mention, custom appearances. Because we've all become used to the idea that anything that is in words comes in black on white. And many of us don't like that, and for a lot of text, it is not the best. Dark mode has actually at last come to a major book reader, Apple's Books app, which now allows you to do that with a fair degree of customization. Some of you may recognize Liquid Author, a superb application which caters for people who want to actually customize the appearance of the text that they're reading. The problem comes with HTML, which, although it never should have done, always ends up as being black on white text. In fact, now you can work around this. Apple has worked around it. If you look in the dictionary app in macOS, it now casts Wikipedia pages in dark mode, and it actually does that rather effectively, rather successfully, without, I believe, any customization on the part of the source page. And web developers are starting to introduce this using CSS. But it means that every single site has to change its CSS to support dark mode, which is absolutely crazy. And of course, the problem is PDF. Where do you go with it? There is no way, other than by simple inversion, and that's actually one of my interlinear texts shown in PDF, and that's all you can do with it. I've not seen any PDF reader attempt to do anything meaningful with the appearance. Here's my own over-the-top app, which actually allows you to change the appearance of individual windows. So we've got a light, a dark, and well, I think this is probably a bit easier on the eyes, but it's still really dark. Again, it's another free reader. That's all I have, really. 3 little ideas, but to me they're examples of where we're moving text away from the limitations of the printed page. There are many wonderful things about printed pages, and there are many things that obviously are worth retaining. But at the same time, we've trapped ourselves in technology. One of the big problems I had doing the interlinear text, for example, is the fact that Apple's text support built into macOS TextKit doesn't actually make it easier to have layered text. Find me an image editor that doesn't support layers in images, and I'll find you a failure. And yet we can't do it in text. It's extraordinary. Thank you.
question that comes to my mind has to do with the general problem of accessibility of text. I'm looking for improvements in tools that let us exhibit text so that people who have visual problems or who are blind can get equal access to it. So I just wondered whether you had given some thought to that, because generally speaking, the tools that are available are still fairly weak.
Yes, I agree. One of the big problems with tools for accessibility is the very wide diversity. I mean, for some groups who are making accessibility requirements, you want to support coloured text. For other groups, coloured text is a disaster. For some, you want to change fonts to fonts that they have clear preferences for, and for others, you want totally different fonts. So I think a lot of this comes down to the same business, really, as with appearance. We don't want fixed fonts in black on white backgrounds. We want the ability to be able to customize that experience completely. It's really simple to do in software. But unfortunately, most software developers just don't do it. So I think it's providing tools, it's opening those up. And it's going to be driven by demand as well.
Well, it helps, if you care about doing accessibility, it helps if you think your way through how are you going to make whatever it is accessible before you design it, as opposed to saying after you've designed it, now what?
I think it's an infrastructure issue. To cover all those bases, the system itself has to allow for that.
Yes.
I think that's very much where Howard is. We're in very much dialogue on this kind of stuff, and it needs to be flexible that whatever you need, you get.
By the way, this ends up the argument, well, I'd say maybe it terminates the ancient argument that I became aware of at Xerox PARC. There was an argument about who gets to decide what the text looks like, the author or the reader. And I generally fall on the side of the reader because of the demands that we were just alluding to. But there are people who are very stuck on I'm the author and I should have full control. I'll leave out any of the bad words that come to mind.
I think in fairness, this is a very important point. In fairness, there is a very valid point on both sides of that, because there are clearly some products, some books that are designed right down to the serifs on the font, and that's fine. That's a designer. Very few texts are designed in that depth, and those are the ones that should be fully accessible.
Peter, you may have a comment on this.
Yeah, well, just the obvious people are the publishers who have a reputation or a tradition of producing what they consider to be the finest possible books, journals, whatever, and it's a series. They don't want your article to look different to my article in the same copy of the journal, because it's not what the readers want. The readers want them all to follow the same pattern, so they know the title's in the same place, the author's in the same place, the geography's in the same place, it uses the same font, it's laid out to the same widths, because the publishers believe that the readers want that. Now, whether they do or not, I don't know, and I have not seen research to prove that. But the publishers definitely believe that.
The publishers are wrong.
Yeah, well, quite entirely possible, but that doesn't stop them believing it.
No, I do not disagree with you on this point.
Yeah.
And the publishers make a great deal out of money.
I'm working with hypertext authors. I've encountered exactly the same issue, that they really care about how their text is presented. And if you drill down into that, it's because what they're doing is they're making choices that embed some kind of meaning in the presentational aspects that they've picked. So the problem you have is I think twofold. So one is, how do you create a system that enables them to define the meaning rather than to define the presentation and let the meaning be implicit? And then how do you define systems which interpret that meaning and respect it, that they can trust, so that that meaning is persistent across different renderings? And I think there's a really, really challenging problems.
Yes, thank you.